Become all things. 3 words from 1 Corinthians 9, verse 22. Obviously, there's a larger context. You can go read it for yourself if you're interested, but those 3 words, become all things. Whatever does that mean? Hello, and welcome to My Daily Walk, the show where a Hollywood guy, that's me, walks around and talks about anything and everything except the things I'm contractually bound to conceal. This is a Monday meditation. I have a series, multiple series, topical series, thematic series. What's the plural of series? Serieses? Multiple series of different types of themes, and Mondays are a meditation, a spiritual meditation, a scriptural meditation. Today's meditation is from, well, it's those 3 words from, if I can remember again, 1 Corinthians 9:22, from the writer formerly known as Saul of Tarsus, and who came to be known as the Apostle Paul, according to the Christian tradition of 2 millennia, or just under 2 millennia of Christian tradition. I like starting the week with this kind of meditation. Again, I know that this recording this recording is probably not going to be listened to by very many people on the first day that it's posted. This is week 6, only week 6 of however long this is going to go, and I'm not doing a huge push initially to market this, promote it. Come to my podcast and listen to My Daily Walk every day. Marketing, self-promotion, all that stuff, it's very, very time-consuming and can be very costly depending on what kind of budget you have. Well, I have 0 budget, so I'm not under the illusion that this recording is going to be heard by very many people, at least not in its initial release or its initial posting. There's 2 sites where it is being posted, where this show is being posted, 2 separate sites. So, what I do believe may happen is that the vast majority of you listening to this right now are doing so in the process of binge listening. I, at some point, will inevitably have said something that piqued someone's interest, that said, hey, check this out, forwarded it to you, maybe you discovered it yourself. Who knows? I could speculate about how people come to this podcast, but in thinking through realistically, the majority of you are binge listening, and I just got a phone call, but I didn't want to interrupt the recording. Okay, it's still recording. I just sorry about that. Responded, please text me, to whoever that was. Anyway, where was I? So this particular episode, and all of the episodes, I imagine, at least initially, up to some point, you are listening. It's not a matter of if you are listening, because nobody will hear these words unless they're listening. So you are listening, and I'm willing to wager the vast majority of you are binge listening or randomly searching through for topics that strike a chord with you, at least the naming of, it's like, the brief description and the name of this one sounds interesting. So here we are. This is the episode, Become All Things. The Monday meditation. Whatever day you're listening, it doesn't matter. I have decided that every Monday in the ongoing release is going to be a spiritual meditation. Start your week off right. Right? Start the week off right with Monday meditation. Right, that there's the slogan or the pitch or the logo or whatever. But I have been getting emails. At this point, I have several emails, so tune in Friday to hear me read through some of those emails. Freeform Friday is reserved for that, and I don't think I had any emails last Friday that I read, so now I do. So emails are coming, and if you want to contribute and be a part of the Freeform Friday email reading, email the show, email me. It's a one-man show. I do have people that post this for me, but it's pretty much an easy turnkey operation. Go out, take my walk, record for 30 minutes, upload it, name it, send it. A couple more steps than that, but if you want to be in on it, email me. MyDailyWalk@thiswaytv.com. All right. There's a lot going on. I always want to include, in case this for some reason is the only episode anyone has ever listened to, I should, mention a few things. I'm still getting my intro. I don't know if my formatting and my intro will ever take on a permanent shape or form. It's extemporaneous, but I am a Hollywood guy. I work in Hollywood. I mean, what does that even mean? There are people that work in Hollywood that live physically in Hollywood and work at a fast food restaurant. I work in Hollywood. Or the actual meaning, I work in some capacity associated with the entertainment industry. And that could be, anybody anywhere that doesn't physically live in Hollywood that works, quote unquote, in Hollywood because of their job. And that is a loud helicopter, but I think you can pick. I don't like pausing this. I don't like edits. I don't want to waste time, which I am doing. I'm just babbling on, but I'm allowing the helicopter to fly by and get out of range. All right, so become all things. So the context. This guy, Paul, says, I have become all things to all men. And he's talking about, there's a theme that recurs in his writings about how he's been through a lot of things. He's been wealthy, he's been poor, he's been in prison, he's stood before kings. the gamut. He's an intellectual, and he's been stoned as a fool, derided and opposed. Stoned with rocks, not, illicit substances. And so he has become all things. And so it seems like this writing is later in his years. But I take from that he's saying that as an admonition or an encouragement to all of us that we should follow suit. He's using it in the past tense, or whatever the tense is, have become, I have become, past, progressive, I don't know. Was never great at grammar, parts of speech, etc. But what does it mean to become all things? All things to all men or all people. Well, also in the context is he's saying it because he sees it as a vital key or a vital strategy or a vital frame of mind in order to be accepted and received by those different groups. He becomes one of them, becomes like them in order to be accepted and received. And for what end? To what end? Well, because he has information that he believes will benefit them. He believes he has an understanding of some facts, an understanding of some historical events that could benefit each one of those groups. And to the Jews, I became a Jew, and he technically is a Jew, but also understands that the Jewish law is not something that he's not a slave to the law. The law is there for a purpose. And then to the non-Jew or to the Gentile, he becomes a Gentile. He comes into their midst and affiliates with them, associates with them, and it reminds me of the disciples. I believe it was the disciples. Probably also. I mean, there were lots of people following Jesus around all the time, and there were those who were devout followers that hung upon every word and took it in, and the true believers, those who had the full buy-in. But then there were those looky-loo, the onlooker. Whenever there's a crowd, somebody go, "Hey, what's going on over there?" And so there's different types of interest. There were people following him around all the time. Well, in the last 3 years of his life, his public ministry, as they say, and so he was under scrutiny. He was in the public eye at this point. He was under scrutiny by everyone, everywhere, all the time, making some of the claims that he made. Ruffled some feathers, roiled people, rubbed them the wrong way. And so he would be critiqued and criticized, every word and every action. And so he would go hang out at the bar at night, or, specifically, he would be invited to parties. Jesus got invited to parties. He did. He was a figure that inserted himself into the public dialogue and rubbed some people the wrong way. And there's sometimes the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So everybody, kind of fights with each other and disagrees, and everybody thinks they have the right take on things or the right take on reality. And so maybe you don't believe the things Jesus was saying, but Jesus said something that offended somebody that you don't like. All right, Jesus offended or called on the carpet the Pharisees and says things the Pharisees don't like. So, I get some interest in, other rich people, famous people, or people of influence in his era, in his locale, would say, "Hey, come have dinner with us." And they'd throw a party, and they'd have the drinks, and they'd have the whatever illicit activities that they like. We're gonna have a party, we're gonna have girls, we're gonna have this, it's just the world as it's always been. And Jesus would get invited, and he would go. He would go, and he'd talk to the host, and the host would ask him questions, and he'd sit, and maybe he'd have a glass of wine, and everybody that was interested in what he was saying would sit around and listen, and people that were interested in just getting wasted would go in another corner, get wasted or whatever. So here was Jesus hanging out, and he was ridiculed for hanging out with, like, being around prostitutes, and it's funny the way the text says it, that tax collectors, like, he's like, "You hang out with tax collectors and prostitutes." It's like they're both in the same category as being like bad, or immoral parts of culture. Well, the tax collector thing is, they were notoriously corrupt in that time. And corruption in government, is that a new thing? No. So the tax collectors were, think about it, this distant country, Rome, this distant capital that's in charge of the entire world at the time, and they're exacting taxes. Give to Caesar, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. That's another famous quote from the big guy. So tax collectors were corrupt. They would take how much they were conscripted to collect. You have to send this much this month. And they would take more. So they would say, well, since I am able to forcibly exact taxes from these people, I'm going to take some more, and I'm going to fatten my own coffers, as it were. So prostitutes and tax collectors were thought of as some of the worst people in society, and Jesus would hang out with them. He'd go to these parties, the bar, wherever, because he was invited. They wanted to hear what he had to say. What's he going to say? No, straighten yourself out. I can't come in among you until you have changed your life. Well, good luck with that. Nobody would ever heard a word he spoke if he waited for all of us to get our acts together. Anyway, so becoming all things to all men. It's a frame of mind, I think, where you set aside judgment. You put aside your preconceptions about people, their lifestyles, whatever they believe, whatever they're into, set it aside, and rather than those divisive words or attitudes, focus on something that could be uniting, something that would unite, something that we can agree upon. I think that is at the core of Paul's intent. I have become all things to all men. I'm at this park and there's a dog and the owner is just shouting at the dog constantly, and I'm not able to go walk past because she's going to shout. I don't know other people's voices on this recording. I don't want to. It's like she's just constantly shouting at her dog. Okay, back to it. Paul's goal was to be accepted, not out of insecurity. Oh, you guys don't like me? No, to be accepted, to be welcomed, to find common ground and not judge people who do things differently. Now, it is a Christian mandate, I guess is the way to put it, is to obey the law of the state, the government, the authorities that have been put in authority over you. So obeying the law of man is important, and if you break the law of man, that's technically a sin, unless the law of man comes into conflict with something that you would call the law of God or the moral law. And you can't legislate morality. I mean, you can't. I don't think you should. You can, but I don't think you should make laws restricting certain types of behavior. Like you shouldn't make certain behaviors illegal, even though they are immoral. And so there's gray area. And so there's always a gray area. If you are commanded by your father to kill someone because you want to steal what they have, well, you're not going to obey your father, or you shouldn't. So those are the exceptions that prove the rule, I guess is the way you say it. There are exceptions that prove the rule you ought to obey. But then there's just plenty of things that are right or wrong in God's eyes, according to whatever faith tradition you follow. There are certainly rights and wrongs that have nothing to do with the societal laws and structure. And so some of the things that are perceived wrong are not actually wrong. I'm kind of beating around the bush, but here's an example from the Christian writings. I don't know exactly where this is, but I think it's in a couple places. But in the Jewish tradition, the Pharisees, the priesthood, that was the political leadership. It wasn't just the religious leadership. They were the politicians. They were the governing authorities of the Jewish people. And so they had a whole bunch of laws that were kind of inseparable from the spiritual law. It was like, if you do this, you're not just breaking the law, you're offending God, or you're sinning. And one of those is like eating food sacrificed to idols. Because you're in a culture among many other cultures, and some of those cultures believe, let's go sacrifice this cow to some goddess, Artemis, or some goddess. Let's sacrifice the cow, cook it up, and have a big feast. Let's all have dinner. Yeah, this is the sacrifice we're eating. And so the Jewish leaders outlawed such a thing. You cannot eat food sacrificed to idols. There are no other gods. You are essentially worshiping that god if you eat that food. Well, that's just an interpretation. It's just food, really. It's going in and it's coming out, and it's not. Your soul doesn't get sold to Artemis with each bite and chew and swallow. So there are things that were prohibited for the Jewish followers, like Paul and the disciples, and it's like in according to those rules. But Jesus comes and says, no. It's not what goes into the body that makes a man unclean. It's what comes out, right? And out of your mouth, out of your heart, out of your soul. Those are the things that make you unclean. So this technicality of not eating food, if it was taken to that location and cut, and these other priests, genuflected and said, "Here, this is for you, Artemis," and now you eat it, and you have, you've sold your soul, you're lost, you're on the side of Satan. No, it's just metaphysical bullying, I guess. Anyway, so that's kind of a tangent, but it's related to this becoming all things. It's being able to recognize those things that are not bad and not wrong in and of themselves. You're not violating the purity and the sanctity of your relationship with God. If that's something you value, if you believe that there's a God that has a purpose for your life, and part of that purpose is living in such a way that doesn't bring dishonor and reproach, and eating food sacrificed to idols has nothing to do with that, unless there's a person of weaker faith around you, and those are exceptions. It's like if there's somebody who is believing the same way you believe, but hasn't come to that realization, that the legalism is destructive, that the legalism is not really what God calls us to. It's the spirit of the law. And so if you're in the presence, say you're at a setting where these guys bring out, hey, we just cooked up this steak, we got it from those guys over there, they had sacrificed it to Artemis, and you're sitting there next to a younger, at that point, a Jewish convert to Christianity, and that person's like, oh, no, that would really, that's wrong, it's wrong, and they're convinced it's wrong. And it's probably not the time and place for you to say, yeah, give me a bite of that, ooh, it's good. And that young convert that might look up to you at the time, be like, what? It might hinder their faith, or hinder their walk, their progress. Yeah, you got to be the bigger guy, the bigger man, the bigger person in the scenario, and say, yeah, even though I believe I can eat that, by doing so, it would actually be detrimental to this other person that's at a different stage in their progress. So I need to refrain. I need to exercise self-control, even though it looks good and delicious and I know it's not wrong. Maybe I'll just have him put it in a doggy bag and I'll take it later and eat it when this friend of mine doesn't know about it. Anyway, becoming all things to all men is about setting aside judgment, discrimination. Now, we all discriminate every moment of every day. I mean, the word discrimination and judgment have been loaded with such pejorative connotation. When I go through a drive-thru and I want to get a milkshake, I'm not going to pick chocolate. if I have the option of vanilla, strawberry, or chocolate, if there's only chocolate, I'll get chocolate. I love chocolate. But as far as milkshakes go, I just have a preference for vanilla or strawberry. In fact, because I can't decide, I will get a mixed. So a vanilla strawberry mix. Some people mix all three, the Neapolitan. But I discriminate in milkshakes. I discriminate against chocolate milkshakes as opposed to strawberry. I will prefer strawberry. I use preferential treatment. I will profile that milkshake. So discrimination is not a bad thing. It's essential to function in society. You have to be discriminating and use your better judgment. So what I'm saying is we need to set aside, or we need to decide what hill to die on. What's more important? Expressing important information to people that you believe will benefit them. And in this case, in Paul's case, he had an irrefutable encounter with something he could not explain other than, oh, Jesus is the fulfillment of all of the scripture. I mean, he had the what is it, the road to Emmaus, or is it the Damascus road? I think it's the Damascus road where he encountered blinding light and heard a voice, and his eyes were closed for a few days, and it was Jesus appearing to him. As he writes, is it in Acts? I'm sure he refers to it a couple times in different places, but I think it's in Acts where he has this encounter. He was actually a high-ranking Jewish Pharisee. He was on his way up, and he sanctioned the martyrdoms, like the killing of this crazy sect of Jewish guys who start following this kind of radical rebel teacher, this guy Yeshua from Nazareth, and he would go around persecuting and sanctioning, and he was apparently at the stoning of one of the very first martyr, Stephen. The first martyr recorded in the Christian writings is this guy Stephen, and the text says that Paul was standing there by the coats. Like, the guys are throwing the rocks, smashing this guy's skull in. They're throwing rocks, hurling rocks at a person as hard as you can. Imagine that, throwing a big rock, as hard as you can at a human body. That's what's going on. These guys pick up rocks and just throw them as hard as they can at this guy, crushing his skull and breaking his bones as they impact. Well, Paul's standing by the coats, like the coat rack. He's just like, okay, you guys go do your thing. I'll make sure nobody steals your stuff out of your pockets. So that's who he was. And he killed these Christians. They are breaking the law of our God. And then he's on his way somewhere, and he's with people, and the other people heard it too. They didn't have the direct encounter, but he records that other people heard this voice and saw it. I don't know if they saw the blinding light. Paul saw it. But so he had this encounter that transformed him, turned him in the opposite direction. And he was an intellect. I mean, he was this intellect, and encounters this thing that kind of violates all the teachings he's ever heard, but cannot deny the reality of his experience. And then he goes and studies and researches for years. It's 14 years he studies it before he steps out and starts talking about it. I mean, that's a crazy thing. He processed this stuff for a long time. And he ended up writing most of the New Testament. And that's what, this world-changing belief system is based on, this encounter that he had, and he was able to put it into words. And so he sets aside all these other foibles that people have and says, I become all things to all men so that they can all at least hear something of what I have to say. And I'm in. I'm on board. I'm trying to abide by that, to follow suit. I think that's a good thing, to not disagree, but to find common ground.